we go.
No.
Thank you for our introduction. I love that introduction. Some weeks I love it more than others, but loved it this week.
Yeah.
So welcome to Spin Legal on 23rd of April 2025. This is episode number 63 with myself and Angela. Hey, Angela, how are you doing?
Oh, pretty good. How are you doing, Peter?
I'm doing good, yeah. Okay, so and today's subject is corporate versus personal identity. There's legal ramifications for that, and we'll get through them.
Yeah.
Okay. So if you need to contact us at Invictus Legal LLP, you can do so at 905-688-5598. Email Angela at angela@weareinvictus.legal or myself at peter@weareinvictus.legal. Our website is weareinvictus.legal. Boom.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so just a reminder, corporate versus personal identity is our topic today. And so what is an individual? An individual is a flesh and blood person like you and me, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
You can go there, you bleed. You're an individual.
Okay, so therefore, we can go there, we can bleed, and if I poke your eye out, it's going to hurt. If I go to poke you in the eye, it's going to hurt, right?
Yeah, there might be a charge for that. There might be a assault or something.
I'm not about to poke you in the eye. I don't want to extract Angela's wrath. Not going to happen.
No, you don't. You really don't.
But okay, so what is a legal person? Right?
A legal person can be an individual, but it can also be a corporation.
Yeah.
A corporation is a legal fiction that has many of the legal rights and obligations.
I don't know that I would call it a fiction because it's a way of flouting personal laws in order to put a corporation in place. Corporation's not a fiction; it's as real as you or I are.
It's a real thing, but what they do is they create it so that it separates the corporation from the individual identity. Okay?
Yeah.
So people create corporations so that if you have personal assets such as a home, your car, your RSP savings, those things like that, if you have these sorts of things, then it's becomes a
protects them.
Protects those things. Okay? So like in most cases, like there are cases where it doesn't, but a corporation.
Well, we'll go through some. Yeah, we'll go through some of those.
Yeah.
As we get through this.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So that's kind of a bit of an oddity. It's a bit of an oddity to say a legal person, but that's exactly what when I did my law degree, that's exactly what my business law lecturer told us. So he said, "What is a corporation?" And he said, "It's a legal person."
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And you kind of go scratch your head for a bit, and you realize it's about the best.
Well, there are legal persons that actually get married. That's what you call a merger, or an acquisition.
Again, that's an interesting one. A few years ago, quite a long time ago, when I was young, I met this gentleman who was a corporate secretary for British Petroleum. One of the largest corporations in the world. And he said, well, I'm corporate secretary for about 300 different companies. I said, okay, that's interesting. We were at one of these, introduce yourself, and that was, what do you do? And, what do you do, but not don't give us your job title, give us what you actually do, right? Mm-hmm. So I spoke to him at lunchtime, and he said, oh, that's fascinating. How do you do that? And it turns out that every company that BP took over, he's the corporate secretary for that, and you have to file paperwork every single year. So he's the corporate secretary for hundreds of companies that they file paperwork all for, right? His department, right? And with a big corporation, they run a fairly large department for that sort of thing. And if you wanted to buy a company off of a big corporation, you could do so.
Yeah. Exactly.
For example, if you wanted to buy, the Bay from that American corporation that bought the Bay a few years ago, you can come back to that American corporation. You can buy the Bay. They can extract it back out and give you the stores that belong to the bay.
Yep, exactly.
And they can even work out what the assets of the bay are.
Yep, and these things are all put together in an interesting way because they'll tell you that X number of assets belong to this particular company, this particular assets belong to this particular company, but all these different companies are all under the Hudson's Bay Company.
Yeah,
Mhm.
exactly. And as you've got these structures, most people who we meet who go into business, they might well have a corner store, let's say Africa Knickknacks .com, right? Is their thing, because they sell nice knickknacks from Africa that people in your high street might be interested in. Not everybody's attracted to that kind of stuff, but some are, right? Some like that kind of thing.
Well, this is what we have. This is called a legal company.
Yeah.
Legal person, and it's a
Legal
corporation. Minute book. See, a minute book represents the corporation, here on this planet.
But again, just to be clear, that legal person can't go drive a car, can he?
Nope.
Can't rent a house, can he?
This can't drive a car, so you can't do that. It can't vote. It can't do.
Can't rent a house, can he?
What?
It can't rent a house, can it?
It can. It can. A corporation can rent a property, for its purposes. It could buy a house.
I was meaning a residential property.
Oh,
when I said a house, residential.
Well, basically, if they own a residential property, they can.
Oh, they can own them, yeah.
Else,
But they couldn't rent one.
No, but they couldn't say, I'm going to N12 you and I'm going to move in. So this thing here is not going to be moving into the property by giving an N12.
Yeah, true.
It isn't going to happen.
Yeah.
Because landlord-tenant board doesn't allow things like that.
Yeah.
Silly corporate names.
Yeah. All right. Okay, so that moves on to the next question. What rights do a corporation have?
Lots of things a corporation has a right to have. They have a right to own property. They have a right to sell property. They can get sued and sue. They could join up with other corporations as a merger acquisition. They can sell, issue, distribute shares. They could do a whole bunch.
They can own things like, they can own a mobile phone or a computer or,
They can own anything and put it under the corporate brand, right?
Yeah.
So I could, say, for instance, if you and I run a corporation, we put the corporation, and corporation buys all the office equipment. And there's steps that you have to do that, particularly if the organization was owned by a sole proprietor prior to that. And then you incorporate, there are different resolutions you have to pass, and there has to be what they call consideration in terms of the exchange.
And then, of course, we have to deal with these kind of horrible things. Every corporation, you have to keep your you have to keep your receipts.
Yep, you have to keep
all of these, and and hey, this is actually the one occasion where I can unfurl it from in front of the thing, and that goes into my expenses at the end of the month.
Yeah, so that goes in the expenses, and I keep another thing for the expenses. So we both do that when we register our individual corps, and then the two corps make into the Invictus partnership.
Oh, so don't give our secrets away, Angela. Don't give our secrets away.
That. Well, we do a lot of fun things.
Yeah.
But the corporation, basically, people do this. It offers some protection. It's best if a corporation has some insurance as well. Like, say, if you want to become a media corporation, best to get some insurance to protect yourself from libel suits. You can't stop people from suing you for libel, but if something comes in and they do sue you, the insurance company at least might defend you and then probably help you out that way. So there's a lot of different things like that that could happen. The reason why it's important, certain things like, say, for instance, if your corporation owns this phone, there's a phone here that the corporation owns, but you're renting it. You don't pay the rent several months, and then the company that's renting the phone to you can go after the corporation and collect money. So they would go after the corporation, but not after the corporation owners, because
Yeah.
usually these phones are rented out to some kind of company.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
So basically, in those circumstances, there's a protection with the corporation because those
And
are,
again,
yeah,
yeah. And again, with all of that, though, we've been kind of saying, well, they seem somewhat similar to people, normal flesh and blood people, but they're not.
they're
Because
not.
really, that minute book you have there, you know, is not something that can drive a car. It's not
Nope,
something
can't
that
drive
can
a
rent a
car.
house.
Yeah, can't drive a car. Although you could say it could get married, but that's more of a merger and acquisition. But it's not the same.
Yeah, and again, it could get divorced, as in we were talking just a few moments ago about you can extract a company out of a full
Exactly.
merged company.
Or they could be ordered to be
Yeah.
extracted. Like, say, if you're looking at antitrust legislation, okay?
That's true.
Like you'll have one big company owning 7 little companies, okay? And they say, well, it's not good to have that big company own 7 little companies. So they might say you might have to divest yourself of all these little companies.
Well, in fact, actually, mergers and acquisitions wasn't something we were actually even thinking about really with this, nor were we talking about monopolies and rules. And that's a whole different ballgame entirely.
Yeah,
because
exactly. Depends on where you are, too. United States has some very good antitrust legislation, but unfortunately, it's not enforced as much. In Canada, we need to improve.
I would tend to agree, because as we get larger and larger corporations become too powerful.
Yeah, they become powerful. Like, just look at social media, how much social media influence everybody's life. Okay? Needs to be broken up so that there's competition out there.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay? So this is one of the things that antitrust legislation does.
Yeah. All right. So we kind of know that there's a difference, therefore, between a person and a corporation. And in fact, actually, when it comes down to it, we set up in business so we set up in business, let's say 2 of us were making canned beans or whatever it is we want to make, right? We set up a business. We got this fantastic business out there. Everybody buys our product. And at some point later, we get an offer from Megacorp USA Limited, right? And it makes sure that Angela gets $20 billion, and Peter gets $20 billion as well. So of course you're going to say, well, fantastic. I'm not giving that up. I'm going to retire. Thank you very much. Here my company, right? So I nice bit of cloud cuckoo land there, but you see, so corporations are sold, they merge, etc.
Yeah, it happens all the time.
Yeah.
Corporations go through changes, many times even changes of ownership.
Yeah.
Different shareholders. Sometimes
there was one I saw recently where there was a corporation and they added a shareholder. This corporation's being sued and the second person comes on as a shareholder. Not sure that's a wise idea.
Interesting. And he really enjoys being added on to the corporation when they're being sued.
Yeah.
I think he should have been told that once before he bought in as a shareholder.
I think so as well. Okay. There's a lot of different types of corporations. And so let's look at some of the various different types of corporations that exist. So we can talk about various unincorporated bodies, like, for example, a sole practitioner. Hey, I put my house on Airbnb. I've got 12 rooms in it, and I'm renting it out to whoever wants to come along, and so I'm a sole practitioner most likely.
Or you're a solo practitioner in paralegal business. You're Peter Giblett Legal Services.
Yeah.
Okay?
And well, in fact, actually, you wouldn't need to incorporate. And with a sole practitioner, you do not incorporate.
Yeah.
But
the one risk is is yourself and your assets are the same as that of your business.
Yeah.
So if something
Your
happens,
nice little pension fund, when you get sued for $1 million, your nice little $500,000 pension fund is gone.
yeah, it's gone, disappears. It disappears down the rabbit hole.
Yeah, because it's seized as an asset when you go bankrupt, when you go bankrupt or whatever.
Yeah. So there's different reasons why people have to put their pension funds into seg funds.
But the one good thing about sole practitioner is that really you don't have to do anything to set up, right? I can just wake up in the morning and say, hey, Angela, I've got a brilliant idea. I'm setting up my own business. I'm going to map the world with the new QPS mapping system. You've never heard of it before. I just invented it, but everybody's going to buy this in 50 years time. Right, everybody will be buying QPS in a year's time. I guarantee it.
Or I can set it up that this is going to sell like hotcakes. And what am I going to be selling? Hotcakes.
Yeah, exactly. And the vast majority of businesses are probably sole practitioner, because essentially I have an idea. The way this operates is I have an idea, I work it out, I work the paperwork on it, and the designs are bust. And I give up. I walk away and I'm done. Right. So that's the life very often of a sole practitioner.
Yeah, exactly. And then it's easy to get rid of too. As soon as you're finished with it, that's it. You just deregister it. It's done.
Many you don't even have to register.
Corporations have a bad habit of sticking around, and you have to take action in order to get rid of them, and you have to.
And if you don't treat the corporate minute books well, they fall off the shelf.
That scared me a minute.
And they destroy the corporate catty.
Yeah. And my poor little kitties there.
Yeah. Okay. But you see, you can do a lot as a sole practitioner. Yes, in Canada, you would, and if you earn a lot of money as a sole practitioner, you would start to collect HST, because as soon as you get over 30,000 in any 12-month period, you have to register for HST.
Yep.
And there are actually a few, believe it or not, I've known of a few people who actually earned a lot of money. They've employed hundreds of people, but yet they're sole practitioners.
Yeah, there is.
And I think to myself, why do you
remain that way?
Yeah.
But as I said, you're still taking a lot of risks.
Yeah, there's a heck of a lot of risk there.
Exactly. Depends on what you're doing too.
They pay the tax.
Really low risk.
Yeah.
It's something that's really low risk. Who cares?
Yeah.
Okay? But if you're employing people, and if you're dealing with HST, different things like that, there are some issues with that, because the thing is that could be pretty tough on a sole practitioner business.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is when people always ask me, shall I incorporate? I'm just opening a new business. Shall I incorporate? I usually tell them no. Wait till they start making a lot of money. And at that point, you have to start thinking about when you start benefiting from the tax cuts that corporation would receive, and also where it would be potentially beneficial in terms of its protection for your assets. And for each type of business, that answer to that might be different.
Okay, then let's look at another type of unincorporated business, which is a partnership.
A general partnership.
General partnership, yeah.
So what happens in a general partnership is you have two people. Okay, Peter and I, we're going to start a bicycle shop.
Yeah.
Okay? Going to have a Peter and Angela bicycle shop. Okay, because Peter likes to drive bikes, and he's learned a lot how to do this, and he was once a bicycle person for, I think you tried out for the Olympics or something. And then
Angela's a great mechanic, so I just get.
I just know. So we just said, hey, let's start a bicycle shop, and we did this. So, and then all of a sudden, I decide, oh, I want to do something else. I want to go start a legal practice, and I leave. What happens when I leave? The partnership goes, no more business.
Yeah.
Right?
So
Unless Peter decides to resurrect it as a solo company.
yeah. And I can resurrect it as a solo company. I could take on, for example, the rent from the bike shop, etc.
Yeah.
You know, I might have a bit of trouble because I'm not a mechanic, so I've just lost my lead mechanic, so I'd have to employ one.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I'd go from a partnership back to a sole practitioner,
Yeah.
and you know, but essentially, both of these organizations, you don't need more than just the people who are doing it. You're always wise to get the more protection you've got, the more things that you've got, things like insurance and that kind of stuff.
Insurance has to be put in
Yeah.
place. The partners buy sell, partners life and disability, different things you need to have put in there. Okay. So that the business is protected just in case something happens.
Yeah, exactly. And and the thing is, I put those ones first because these are the simplest types of businesses to create. They're the simplest types of businesses to dissolve. And generally, you get way less government interference in any of them, right?
Yeah, government interference, like they care about every single solo practitioner.
No, and in fact, actually, there's for every corporation, there's probably 20,000 sole practitioners.
Yeah, exactly. There's a
Right?
lot of different sole practitioners, and for many types of businesses, this is probably the best way to run it.
Yeah, yeah. All right. So you grow. You've been a sole practitioner, or you start to take your business seriously, or you're a person who basically is very serious about how you're going to do with your business. You're possibly going to set up your thing as a limited company or incorporation.
Yeah. Yeah, to become an Inc., there's a registration process to go through, and you want
And
to
in
make sure
Canada,
you have
yeah.
to search your name to make sure you're not using a name that somebody else is already using. Okay.
Well, unless the only difference about that one, of course, is that if you're using your own personal name,
Yeah, exactly.
Angela Browne Inc.
Yeah.
There can be 3 Angela Browne Incs.
Yeah. Yeah. And that you have to be a little careful about that. And even if you're just running a solo practitioner business, like Peter Giblett Legal Services, and then somebody else has Peter Giblett Legal Services Inc.
Yeah.
So, it could be confusing. So
Yeah.
these things, that's why you register these things, and that's why you conduct a search even before filing for a sole practitionership.
Yeah.
I've seen things where I've looked at persons say, "Oh, I came up with a really great name for a company," and then they put it in, they register it, and then I go in and says, "Well, what's the name of your company again?" I try to look it up, but you can't find it anywhere because there's about 20, 30, 40 similar sounding companies, and
Yeah.
I don't know which one is yours. And there is some companies that I know that are like that. You have to be distinguished if you're going to do this.
And let's be honest, some well-established names like International Business Machines, it's such a boring name, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, International Business Machines, yeah. But it was a wealthy company.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not knocking it. I'm not knocking it. IBM, great company. Know many people who work with IBM, but there are some absolute boring names out there.
Yeah,
Let's be honest,
exactly.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And there was one in Britain which was International Computers Limited.
Oh yes, or Acme.
No, International Computers Limited, ICL.
But I was thinking Acme was another name.
That's another one, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so a limited company, though, we should talk about what protection you get from a limited company. So I've got I just retired from a fantastic union job. I've got a $1 million pension at my home, but I'm being really out there. I'm doing something brand new that I think is going to break the world, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I set myself up as a limited company to protect all of that stuff. How does it really protect me?
It doesn't. It doesn't. Okay. Because what happens is, first of all, if you own a house, okay, and if you have a spouse, it's best to keep the spouse owning the house and you not being on the deed if you're going to be doing any kind of company or whatever.
Yeah.
Okay? Like you have those rights under family law anyways. So if there's something happening to your marriage, you could still get half the house.
Yeah.
But what happens here with the say if you do set up your limited company and you happen to own a house already because you've already bought something 20 years ago and you're still in it. Okay. So what you want to do is you still want to get insurance. Okay. So if something you like I say, if you're making hockey pucks and then someone uses your hockey puck and somebody gets hurt, okay, then somebody decides to come after you because some
Well,
defect in it.
yeah. Yeah, exactly.
People
And
sue over the silliest things. So you really have to do. So if it's a product, there's something called product liability. You have to be careful.
yeah, yeah,
Okay. So there's torts. Okay. It's not necessarily money that you owe because the company's assets are different than your individual assets.
yeah,
Okay. So your company owns that bank account, your company writes the checks for this one, your company, those types of things are separate. But when it comes to things like where a tort is committed, where there's product liability involved, where perhaps if you're a media company and then you potentially committed an act of libel against the mayor or something, hey, even though some of them deserve it, but but this is the thing, so you have to be
yeah.
very,
But again,
yeah,
again, if you personally commit an act of libel against the mayor, he's suing you, Angela Browne, not your company.
right, he is, because you're the one who made a statement, okay? And then he can do that through the corporation because those are things that you could technically breach the corporation. So what happens is people get insurance, specialized insurance for their particular type of company that they have.
Yeah.
Okay. So what happens is you're a media
I mean,
company and you have insurance that protects you in terms of libel suits. It
yeah,
doesn't indemnify you, unlike what people think, but they may offer a defense for you if somebody comes in and accuses you of libeling them.
yeah.
So it's a very thing where you do this and it offers that type of protection. So because people sue at the drop of a hat, hey,
Yeah.
for things, hey.
And actually a limited company, if you were putting out, if you had a news website and you were a news journalist operating through your own personal limited company, News Inc., right? So News Inc., this is Angela Browne reporting for News Inc., right? Even though it's your company, you get some protection because what you said was on the basis of News Inc.
Yep, as long as you're carrying on in terms of a normal activity for that corporation.
Yeah,
Okay, you're running a media company. You're not there to set up jabs against people. Okay, but you're reporting on the news and you're taking steps. There's journalistic standards out there somewhere. Okay, where people are supposed to try to report close to the truth, and then there's some things where you could write about that are more opinionated. Okay, and these things normally should be separated or at least identified when one is one and one is the other.
yeah.
Okay. So that's one of the things. Or if you're a company where you're a landscaper and then you hire people and then somebody suddenly falls down and then a piece of equipment injures them, right? While you're doing this, that's another one. It's a tort of negligence or there could be other types of things. So these things, the company would
Okay,
carry
so
that type of liability insurance.
while we're on that subject, something happens and you're out there, and something happens. Let's say you don't put the brake on your car, and I get injured because the car rolls down the hill and smacks me into a park bench. So I injure my head. Right. So my spouse then sues the living daylights out of you because of the injury you caused. Right. Now they don't know. They know you as an individual, but so they can end up suing the wrong person, can't they?
Many times, because sometimes you don't know that who owns that is actually a company, not an individual.
Yeah.
Okay? So it's often important to do a search and find that out. Okay? So when you go to a store, it looks like a restaurant that they call themselves a McDonald's. Okay? and you go in and then you slip on the floor and injure yourself, okay, oftentimes they're owned by a numbered company that's local,
Yeah.
right? That's a franchise owner. So you do 1234892 Ontario Inc., okay, which is acting as McDonald's on Welland Avenue or whatever, okay? So these are so this is why you have to be careful. You can't just go in there and say, "I'm suing McDonald's." Okay? And which one? Hey?
Yeah. Yeah.
So these things we have to be really careful if you're looking at that
Well,
because
that actually identification is quite important because you're right in that sort
yeah,
of thing. Because in fact, actually, McDonald's as a publicly, as a public company
mhm,
who's traded on the Dow or whatever stock exchange they are on, is an international traded company, but they're not the ones who hold the franchise for the place where you slipped and fell.
yeah, exactly. So it's the same thing as if you're. I've had people come in for employment law cases, and they just said, "I don't know. I just work for this guy named George Richard." Okay, and I said, "Okay. I'd like to know a little bit more about it, like who writes your paychecks? What does it say on the top of your paycheck? What does it say on your record of employment?"
Most likely ADT.
Yep. Okay. But it'll actually have a reference to the employer's
Yeah,
name.
I know. I
Okay.
know. I'm joking.
So, like, I just recently got a case. They had a name of a restaurant where this person worked at.
Yeah.
Okay. So I had to go through, and I found a numbered company that actually owns that series of restaurants,
Yeah.
including the one that the
Yep.
person was working at. And then I did a search of that company to find out who to sue. So I've got two people who own that, and this is how you do it. So I first of all draft a letter, write a nasty letter to them. Then I give them a little bit of time to respond. Oftentimes they will start hiring a lawyer to respond on their behalf, or they will write back to you. And so these are things you just have to be very careful. You got the right people, the right address for
Yeah.
service, that sort of thing.
Okay.
And very often when people act for themselves, they don't know how to do this. But this
Yeah.
is an office where we do this all the time.
Yeah. And just as a note, here in Canada, we use limited companies or we use incorporations. The name Inc. comes from the United States. The name Ltd. comes from Britain. So
Yeah.
we're kind of a merger here between British rules and American rules.
And there's also corporation. Okay,
That's
we have
true.
a couple clients with that using
Yeah.
corporation.
Yeah.
Okay, but then of course they're part of a larger parent
Okay.
company, which is also a publicly traded company.
So limited companies have stocks and shares, and the other thing that we talked about, we talked about the similarity between sole practitioners and partners. So another look at a limited company is what's called a limited liability partnership, like what we have here for
Yeah,
Invictus Legal.
yeah, Invictus Legal LLP. Okay,
Yeah,
you'll see that with a lot of different companies that are professional companies.
professional corporations.
Yeah,
Yeah, professional. We didn't. One of the things we didn't talk about with inks and that is that those can also be professional
yeah,
corporations.
professional corporations and many types
If you're an
regulatory
accountant,
bodies, they only allow you to incorporate if you incorporate as a professional corporation.
yeah, yeah. If you're an accountant, or if you're a lawyer, you have to incorporate as a professional corporation.
Yeah. And it's a little bit funny on the tax law there for them, and funny for the things there, but they do it that way for a reason.
Yeah,
They don't want people. They want people to have a certain level of responsibility, and we also have to carry insurance. So
and
it's
the
a very
same. Yeah, and the same with limited liability partnerships. Again, you get partnerships in tax. Accountants have partnerships, lawyers have partnerships, doctors have partnerships. Limited liability partnerships are typically professional corporations, but that are managed as a partnership.
yeah, exactly. Okay, and sometimes it's just like Joe Blow and Peter Smith, who are a
Yeah,
limited liability partnership. But it's very important to put the corporation in because a corporation adds little bit extra protection.
Yeah, and most limited liability partnerships in most of the rest of the world operate whereby individuals, the partnership is made up of John Smith, Mary Jones, Abdul Quresh, and Angela Browne,
Yeah.
right? Whereas in Ontario, you can actually have a partnership made up of corporations. So you can have partnership is made, whatever LLP is made up of ABC Inc., DEF Inc., and DEF Limited.
Yeah. And it becomes that way, which is a thing. And the nice thing about limited liability corporation partnerships is that if I take off and I leave, that company could still continue to operate.
Yeah.
Right. And also, if I do something and I am found liable of something and I have to pay, it is my half of it, and it does not extend to the other half of the partnership.
Yeah. Well, and by the way, we've only talked about, you generally talk there about two-person partnerships, but
yeah, but there could be several more.
There can be a lot more partnerships. You look at something like many larger law firms might well have 40, 50 partners.
Yeah, exactly. They have different levels of partnerships and different things. And Invictus chooses to remain a small firm. We don't want to be a big firm because we want to look into doing other things like consulting and other things.
Okay, so one of the questions we had talked about with these, we're talking about limited companies or incorporations and limited liability partnerships. And really what we're talking about here are for-profit corporations.
Yeah, exactly. Like these are things where technically you're supposed to go into business to actually make money.
Damn, I knew I was doing something wrong.
Concept?
I'm doing something wrong. I didn't make a penny out of it. I seem to pay more money to the company now.
Like I heard this thing, I saw a sign one time. He says, "Welcome to my not-profit corporation." He says, it wasn't set up that way, but somehow that's the way it's turning out to be.
And I saw this mug the other day that on the one side of it, it said CEO, right? Yeah. And on the other side of it, it says, "I'm chief cook and bottle washer too."
And basically the purpose of a for-profit corporation is that the people that own it retain the profits.
Yeah.
Right? The shareholders get the profits, get distributed. So whoever owns it or is invested in it gets the profits. And they also take the liabilities and the losses.
Yeah. Okay. And let's go on then to a non-profit corporation.
Okay. A non-profit corporation is a non-shareholder. It's a non-profit, non-shareholder corporation. So you don't have shareholders, you have memberships.
Yeah.
Okay. So like you're a golf club member.
Yeah.
Okay. Or you're part of the Lions Club or part of the Kiwanis. Okay. Like Dave Wheeler, okay, who you meet with in the morning. So these people they sit on a board. Okay. It could be a multi-million-dollar corporation, a nonprofit organization, like the Salvation Army is a multi-million-dollar organization, but it is a nonprofit organization. It does not run where members accrue profits from the operation of the corporation.
And most non-profit corporations have been set up because they are like you said, with service clubs, where Kiwanis, for example, or the Lions Club, they collect money. So what will happen is, Angela, can you give me a donation? I need some donation for the children, or whatever it is.
Or you're going to give some money to the hospital, raising money to buy a new room at the hospital. So
exactly.
So things like that.
And organizations like Kiwanis or Lions or Rotary all have that, because they're a group of people all joining together in a particular area. It's a lot easier to raise funds And maybe, as you said, like a room in a hospital, dedicating a room in a hospital, let's say a recovery room in a hospital, because there hasn't been a properly done recovery.
Or a children's area where children can visit with their parents, when they come
that
in.
kind of thing. Yeah.
So it's a very nice type of thing. But there's two types of nonprofit organizations. One is just a regular nonprofit, and the other one is a charitable nonprofit organization. A charitable nonprofit organization is registered federally with the Canada Revenue Agency, where it can act in and can give tax receipts out for any of its donations. Okay? A charity is a little bit more limited in how it can operate. Okay? They have to operate for charitable purposes. Okay? And charitable purposes have been all outlined again and again over time. They generally have community bases, religious orientation bases, educational bases, and that type of thing. Health, So these things where people would give money to, say, United Way. United Way gives out money for charities, or you can give money to, say, a Canadian Mental Health Association, or a homeless shelter. So there's different things people would set up a charitable organization. So you go out and raise funds for it, and then you can do that. But a nonprofit organization that is a non-charitable status, they have a lot more say. They could be political. If you want to set up a neighborhood watch association or a neighborhood association against 32-story buildings being built in my neighborhood, they could do that.
I'm the leader of one of them.
Oh, yes. Yeah. So these are things that...
What would it be called? It would have to be called Nothing Above 25.
Yep, Nothing Above 25, Coalition for a Better St. Catharines, Better Niagara, things like that, where people have gone for a particular purpose. All of these organizations that are nonprofit have to be set up with specific purposes in mind. Like, I can set up an organization where I really would like to see the homeless people given somewhere to go, but not hanging around downtown, which is fine. We have
I've got a place for that, right? Go down that road there and turn right on that road and go left there. Exactly. You'll find the jail at the end.
And then we do things as organizations, like, say, I could set up usually it's called a business improvement area, but some business improvement areas are a lot more where they say, okay, let's try to organize where they'd actually get a building built and then get some fundraising going, and then they can have a place where homeless people can hang out in the daytime instead of going around bugging people in their businesses and harassing customers. So there's a lot of different things that are approached by the community. So these nonprofit organizations, they contribute a lot to communities. And give people like me something to do when I have an axe to grind.
Okay. So another type of corporation is a cooperative corporation.
Yep. And this is a member driven. Like, for example, one of the most common cooperative corporation is a housing cooperative corporation, where a housing project gets built, incorporated through the Ministry of Finance. I believe it still does that way. And the project gets built, you go out, find some land, get some money, get a mortgage, and then people come in, they live in the housing, you screen people before they come in to make sure they've made a good member. All the members there have to contribute something to the cooperative corporation, whether it's writing an article in their newsletter, whether it's sitting on the board, whether it's going out there and finding new members, a lot of different things.
But again, like cooperative housing doesn't necessarily, one of the big problems with something like cooperative housing is actually about people who are not involved in the board. Not involved in the corporate.
The non-participants. Every co-op has its problems with what we call non-participants.
Yeah.
I used to live in a co-op. That was amazing. I have stories.
I'm sure. I'm
Yeah.
sure. Okay, so we've talked about a raft of companies, but what we've talked about here have been primarily companies that exist here in Ontario. So we're talking about any homegrown company right here from Ontario, because there's a couple of things we have to also consider. Things like federal corporations, like banks, the post office. Well, post office is more than a federal corporation. It's a
Crown Corporation.
Crown corporation.
Yeah,
Yeah.
which is technically owned federally, but is operating as a business.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like to get a federal corporation, which I have incorporated, I've worked with a few people who are federally incorporated. You want something that would have the range across Canada.
Yeah.
Okay? Would be able to be in effect or being able to practice in the province, even though it could be headed in Ontario. But say, for instance, if you want to start getting another head office, say in Manitoba, then you'd have to get an interprovincial number on it
Yeah.
in Manitoba. Hey, so if you're practicing in Manitoba and somebody in Manitoba has a grievance with that particular Manitoba chapter of yours, they could sue through the Manitoba interprovincial. Hey, it's a
But okay, so you start yourself off as a normal Ontario limited company and you grow. Now you've got yourself 15,000 employees in Toronto, but now all of a sudden you're exporting pretty well everything to BC or to Alberta. And you think about kind of, well, now it's time that I maybe need to get myself a federal corporation.
Yep, get a federally incorporate or make it into a parent company, right? That will hold your company that you already have, and then maybe another company in another province, and you hold that under the federal corporation. So there's a lot of different ways that can work. That's too complex for this type of show,
Yeah.
but it does
No, I'm
allow
just trying to give a flavor.
it does allow you to have the reach across.
Yeah, I'm just trying to give a flavor in that
Exactly.
regard, because that's the typical sort of thing that does
Like,
happen.
for example, Walmart. Okay?
Yeah.
Like
Well,
somebody goes into, I got a, like if somebody in
a different
Ontario
company
slips
there.
and falls in a Walmart and any Walmart across Ontario, because they're basically corporately owned. Okay, so
Yeah,
you
but
go
you're talking there about a foreign corporation, not a
yeah,
federal
exactly.
corporation.
Because
Yeah.
there's Walmart, which is headed in the U.S., and they're a company in the U.S., which is under the Waltons still,
But
amazingly.
if you were to fall in a bank, let's say like TD Bank, right?
Mhm.
Sorry, TD, but you tripped and fell in a in a bank, you'd be suing a federal corporation.
Yep, exactly. And it has particular office, that sort of thing,
Yeah.
and it works that way. But
Yeah.
into a Walmart, for example,
Yeah.
because it's a foreign corporation, okay? Like what you do is that there's a extra provincial corporation which accepts service for Walmart Canada.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's Walmart Canada, and they have their own legal department because they deal with all the slips and falls across
Of
Ontario.
course.
Okay?
And hey, um, any company like Walmart, which is a worldwide organization, because they've got Asda in the UK, they've got other parts of Europe where they've got Walmart stores, they've got America, they've got Canada. They've got a legal department that's probably fairly busy because slips
Yep.
and falls all the time, right?
Exactly. And this is which allows a corporation to spread into other countries, and to be able to provide services in other countries. Hey, Google has its own headquarters in Canada.
Yeah,
Okay, same as
exactly.
Facebook. So we have them all here. It's not like some entity that we have to go to Palo Alto to sue.
Yeah, but hey, it's a bit more fun to go to Palo Alto and sue.
Well, if it's in the middle of the winter, maybe, yeah, that'll be a good one.
Yeah. But hey, you make more money in California, but make more money in California. No, I'm joking.
Yes, exactly.
In fact, you wouldn't necessarily make any more money by suing in a foreign land.
Yeah.
For example, if you sued Facebook because they took the episode of Spin Legal down, you wouldn't you know, whether you sued in Ontario or California, you'd probably get the same result.
Yeah, and the thing is, you know, let's just not give them any ideas.
Of course not, but you know what I'm saying
exactly.
there. Yeah. Okay, so we've done quite a raft of corporations there. We've done sole practitioner, you know, non-incorporated, essentially, all the way up to non-profit, for-profits and non-profits. Then we're still missing one though, which is this publicly holding company, which is publicly
Or a
traded.
publicly traded company. Yeah.
Yeah.
So these are companies that show up on the TSX, the NASDAQ, the Dow Jones. These are companies that actually have a stock exchange. So these are where anybody can buy shares.
Yeah.
Okay, and trade shares. They can sell, buy. You see these people at the New York Stock Exchange. You see them on the phone all the time, and you see that these people are trading shares back and forth, and they're dealing with that, you know.
Yeah.
So these companies, you know, so you always hear about how the Dow Jones went. Yeah, after a certain individual set up some tariffs, and
we're not going there. Okay, so what do all companies have in common? Right, all companies have shareholders. Right, every company from a privately held corporation to a publicly held corporation all have shareholders. These are people who have an ownership stake in the company.
Yeah, it could be one person as a single shareholder company,
or it could be 200,000 people,
or it can be hundreds of people.
Yeah, or even thousands of people.
Yeah. And then the way it goes into public companies, or certain types of companies where you can have, if I own 50 shares and there's 100 shares in a company, if I own 50 shares, I generally have 50% of the vote. Okay, so it's a very much of that type of thing.
Yeah. And the other thing about many companies is that they have directors. The difference between directors and shareholders are the owners. They're the people who put money into the company. They're not necessarily running it on a day-to-day basis. A director is the person who runs it on a day-to-day basis, and a director may also be a shareholder.
And they have to run it on behalf of the shareholders.
Yeah.
And they have to deal with things in a very prudent, responsible manner as directors. Because they're like trustees, like if you have a trust fund or whatever. Like
many directors are actually, many directors are shareholders as well.
Yeah, some of them get shares as a part of their compensation, and then they stop being a share director. Then they could sell the shares back to the company. So there's a lot of that type of thing going on. So when you're a director, you don't have as much power, though, you know, as people think that they think, oh, well, you were the chairperson of this particular board. Yeah, it's very symbolic. And yes, there is a persuasive ability. But if you got 95% of your shareholders that want things another way, it isn't going to work for you.
There's actually one particular person who is very important, of course, within that. Usually the chief executive officer, sometimes called the president, is usually the head of the board.
And that is the person who does all the responsibility of the day-to-day.
Yeah.
Okay. So you get somebody.
Directors. Yeah. The CEO has directors work for them. The CEO reports to the shareholders. The CEO has a lot of responsibility in terms of making sure that corporation is profitable.
They head up the departments, and they assign people in the different line departments. And then those line departments hire people to work in those line departments. So it's like your whole pyramid you have in terms of your organizational chart. And your CEO is the one who's on the top. But they also take the hit when something goes wrong.
Yeah. At the end of the day, they're the person responsible when something bad happens. But also they're kind of like in the government, you have the prime minister. The prime minister is kind of the country's CEO in a way.
Yeah, exactly. And they can get and they say, oh, it's all your fault. It's all your fault. Oh, I went down the street and I stubbed my toe on the curb. Oh, it's a prime minister's fault.
Yeah, and the corporations have that same question as well. So
Yeah.
that actually leads us on to that kind of issue. Can I sue a corporation? And the answer, of course, is yes.
Oh,
Absolutely,
yes, of
you can.
course.
Yeah.
Corporations get sued all the time, and they're even more fun. The bigger they are, the more fun they are to sue.
Well, especially since the question is that in suing a corporation, it's so easy that hey, she slipped and fell in the McDonald's on Lundy's Lane. Okay, so you're suing McDonald's Corporation in California. Why?
Hmm.
Right?
You
The
have to
wrong,
make sure
wrong,
that you're directing it
yeah,
properly.
the wrong person in the frame for the particular thing. You have to
Yeah,
get the right person to be
yeah.
sued.
Some companies, as I said, Walmart tends to be corporately owned for their chapters. Some
Yeah,
companies are more individually owned with franchises.
yeah. Well, typically McDonald's is franchise based.
Yeah, they had it. I worked for a franchisor when I was my first job was
Yeah,
actually at a McDonald's up north,
yeah.
and it was owned by a guy, and this owner was great. Hey,
Right.
yeah, he gave us all raises. He was pretty good.
All right. There's an important thing because I hear this all the time. So the bastard who owns that company, right?
Hmm.
So can a person who owns a corporation be held personally liable? It's the whole point about having incorporation, right? Is to divide, is to differentiate liability from what the corporate liability is to what the personal liability is.
In some cases, you can, okay? Especially when you're doing things like a tort and you're doing something deliberately as an individual, okay, within the company.
Yeah,
But in most cases, a lot of times the company would take the responsibility when there could be vicarious liability. Okay, but the corporation would be because the corporation owns the McDonald's.
yeah,
Okay, and your beef is with the manager. Okay, the manager might have done something. Okay, might have fired you, might have done something to you. Okay, but however, the corporation will indemnify the manager, probably fire him too, but will compensate you for whatever your loss was.
yeah. And in fact, actually, there's another thing here. So Joe, who's the operator of the digger, who's digging on your street, suddenly picks up a great big boulder, which is attached to your car and flips your car on its lid. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, you can't sue Joe, the
Mm-hmm.
operator. He might be the one who's liable for the damage to your car, but there's a thing called vicarious
Yeah,
liability.
vicarious liability goes behind that person, and who employs that person,
Yeah.
or contract is out with them.
Yeah. And even there can be some complexities, because if Joe is employed by a subcontractor, but the subcontractor is just a staffing agency, it might well be the city of St. Catharines that actually employs that subcontracting agency. So you may have to then be suing the city of St. Catharines.
Yeah, I've had a situation like that where I had a snow clearance type of issue, somebody slipping and falling on the sidewalk and seriously injuring themselves, and went after the city first, and then they wrote a letter to the city. The city wrote me back a letter saying, it's not our fault. It's the fault of this subcontractor. His name is blah, blah, blah. It was a company that they had.
Yeah.
Okay. So I just looked it up and searched up the company and I found out where they were and so forth. And then I said, okay, I'm going to sue both the city and the company. So I got them both sued. So what happens is you get them jointly responsible. And often when you settle a claim, they kind of pitch in with each other, although the city will take the most responsibility. And then the contractor would take a partial responsibility.
Yeah. Okay. Um, Yeah, and the point being is that there's some responsibilities down the line, and when who you sue, you have to be really careful with.
Yeah, exactly. So
Yeah.
this is where it's very, very important. So this is why, you need people like Invictus Legal to
Mhm.
help you determine this.
Yeah. And for example, we talked about various types of companies here, but there's a difference. For example, there's some differences. For example, if your landlord is a person or a corporation, right?
Mhm.
There's things that people can do with properties that they own that corporations can never do.
Yep. Yep. So I mean, this is the thing. Like, yeah. So I mean, this is where you need to do that. So this is where humanity sometimes is. Like this is why when we talk about family law, like family law, we're talking human persons. We're not talking corporations.
No, exactly. Okay. So that's been a kind of brief run over corporate law. It's really been kind of just informative. Let everybody know that there are differences and how those differences function. And unless you've got anything else, I think we're kind of gone through the whole gamut of what a corporation is and what their responsibilities are. So if you need to contact Invictus Legal LLP, you see, a limited liability partnership.
Yep, we are an LLP.
Yep, you can do so by calling 905-688-5598. You can email Angela at weareinvictus.legal or myself at peter@weareinvictus.legal, or go on our website, which is https weareinvictus.legal. And that just leaves us the wrap up for the day with Angela.
Okay, so what you heard today on Spin Legal, whether this show or others in a series, that this is not legal advice. Okay, many times people are now listening to podcasts, now going on Facebook, now going on these different places. Oh, now I know what to do with my landlord. No, this is not legal advice.
And
Okay?
by the way, this is not Spin Legal University. This is just Spin Legal, a
Yep, Spin
podcast.
Legal podcast. Okay?
Yeah.
So, but if you do need legal advice or something we say on any of our shows trigger something where you want to talk to someone, hey, feel free to give us a call or to call your own lawyer or paralegal. Hey, be nice if you come to Invictus, but do speak to somebody because then they can deal with how the law will apply in your specific situation.
Yeah. All right. So have a great week, and we'll see you next Wednesday.
Yep.
We'll be back on Spin